Welcome back to the Quantum Connection. I am here with my co-host Heather Crimson, and we also have the amazing Heathar Shepard with us today. She is a classical homeopath and our homeopathic trainer, where we've learned all of our homeopathic knowledge. And she also teaches at the Applied Quantum Biology Collective Institute, where she heads the sunlight module there. She has the author of the Sunlight RX ebook, and she's been in her own healing practice for, I think, 10, 12 years, something like that, Heather. You can remind me of that. And she has her own podcast, The Primal Pioneer, which I love to tune into each week. So welcome, Heather. So happy to have you here.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, awesome.
When you say primal, Vanessa, I'm also thinking of Heather's pigs and chickens and her soon-to-be cow and this like whole cool ranch thing you have going on that we actually got to go visit recently. I think it was August. I forget anyway. And it was just incredible. So you are the real deal. You live in your, you walk the talk, like quite literally, you actually walk the talk.
Yeah, you're not just you're really practicing what you preach there. And yeah, your place was like so beautiful. I love the farm. I love that you're getting more animals, and the non-native EMFs there just zero, which was amazing. So like so many amazing things there. That's really cool. And you got all the cooking stuff too. We learned a lot of really good cook too. So you got a lot of good things going on, Heather.
Well, it didn't happen overnight. It's been a dream for a long time. And so I'm so glad that you guys got to experience and hope to have you back in the near future. And yes, it's very primal here. That's for sure. I don't know. I've heard this is good luck. I'm not sure, but I was raking leaves this morning because the chickens like to, scratch around in the leaves and it gives them a fun activity, and a raven shit on my head. So, that's like
Are you serious?
I'm dead serious. I was like, did a raven just take a dump on my head? Yes, it did. Okay, here I am. Some people say that's good luck. I'm gonna go with that.
We just go with good luck. This is good luck for you getting a cow. It's gonna work out really good.
Yes. I'm really hoping and praying for that, but it's primal out here. What can I say? That's true.
That's awesome. You're blessed.
Yeah, you are blessed, I would say.
Yeah.
So Heather, why don't we start a little bit about your health journey, if you want to share a little bit, because I know it's, sunlight and homeopathy have been the game changers for you, and circadian biology and all that. So why don't you share a little bit about that to start us off?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. All right, I'm gonna make it as succinct as I can. So in my past life, I was an athlete and played Division I basketball, and then went on to train professional athletes after college. And I was like, oh, amazing. I landed this great job training professional athletes. Awesome. And I'm gonna do this for the rest of my life. And it was like, okay, that's it. I'm set. And so one day I was driving to work and I was like, I woke up and I had this weird feeling. I was like, I shouldn't get out of bed today. Something feels off. And I was like, I gotta go to work. So I'm driving to work. Something comes over my car. I have no idea. I couldn't tell you. I lose control of my car. It's a new car. I swerve. I hit a telephone pole. It busts into, and I lose consciousness, and I hit my head on the steering wheel and have a TBI. So I'm like in and out of consciousness, and the ambulance comes. I go to the hospital. They give me CT scans, MRIs, fine, whatever. They're like, oh, you hit your head, you have a concussion, just rest for a few days and you'll be fine. I was like, oh man, that sucks. Like I have never, of all my athletic career, had never had an injury. Like maybe I busted my toe once. It was like I was never had an injury. So I was like, oh man, this is the worst. Like a few days off. God, that's horrible. And a few days goes by and I'm like, oh yeah, I feel horrible still. And so this turned into not just a few days, but actually several years of not feeling well. And like all my scans were fine, and everyone's like, you're fine, you should go back to work, it's okay. and my body was obviously not okay. Something got rattled in my brain. And so for years, 5, 8 years, I was like trying to heal my brain with every alternative thing you could possibly think of. And it was just like maybe something would give me relief for an hour or two, or maybe a day at most. And then I'd just go back into this cycle. And it was super frustrating.
What kinds of things were you doing, Heather?
What kinds of treatments?
It didn't help. Yeah.
Oh man, I did acupuncture, and literally, I mean, I did a lot of other things. Acupuncture was one of the main things. And the day I felt like 24 hours relief after an acupuncture session, I was like, I'm going to go to acupuncture school. This is it. And I literally went to acupuncture school, and I was there and I was like, oh man, dang it. This is a cool medicine, but it's not it. It's not getting to it. I love the medicine. I think it has a lot of deep, rich history and so forth. But it wasn't really it. So, acupuncture, chiropractic, massage, craniosacral, not that those things weren't like amazing and supportive in their own right, but they just weren't helping me make forward movement for any long period of time. So, so eventually I discovered sunlight, and I discovered homeopathy. They interestingly happened around a similar time. And then that was the game changer. But it was about 7 or 8 years in. And it wasn't like I find the sunlight and then like the next day I'm better. It took time, but it was like the longest. And still today, it's like, it's been the most, that and homeopathy have been incredible assets to my own healing journey.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Definitely. Yeah. And sunlight has got so many amazing benefits. And Heather and I, we discuss it all the time on the podcast as much as we can. I'm like so disappointed that the UVB light has left my area. And I know Heather is too. And I'm like, oh man, come on. Gotta wait a couple months. But we would love it, since you have all the sunlight knowledge, and you really have such a really strong depth knowledge on sunlight, if you share a little bit about why the sunlight is so important for healing.
I don't even know where to start with that question.
It's like everything, right? But yeah, I mean, I really truly believe, and I know you say it all the time, but if anybody's on a healing journey and they're just not ready to embrace the sun, it's probably not going to work as effectively.
Honestly, it's just not. It's
Yeah.
honestly not. And I only know that from firsthand experience with myself. And before I discovered sunlight, I was solely had a nutrition practice and worked with clients from a purely nutritional standpoint. And until I came into how to use the sun therapeutically, it was only then where my nutrition clients started to make more and more progress that just isn't capable, that it's just not attainable with just diet alone. There's so many reasons for that. We can go into whatever direction you all want to. But with regard to sunlight, I had heard a podcast years ago and was like, hey, it could be a good idea to watch the sunrise to help support circadian biology. And I was like, oh, that's a fun idea. I work a lot. I want to be outside more. Sure, I'll go and watch the sunrise. And I was out there, and people here like watch the sunrise, but you could do that for 2 minutes, and sure, but from a therapeutic standpoint, a bigger dose is actually helpful in this case. More is better, especially at sunrise. So honestly, I would stay out for 30 minutes, usually an hour at the beginning of my sunlight practice for sunrise. And I was like, I think looking back, even after day one, I was like kind of in a better mood, kind of have more energy. I feel more positive about life. And then it just kept going. Like I was sleeping better. My digestion was improving. It was like this free freaking thing. and I've been pouring thousands of dollars into trying to heal my brain, and I literally stand outside for an hour at sunrise, and this is the result. You've got to be shitting me right now. It was like, oh, okay. And so I just kept doing it, and it was like food for my brain and my brain healing and my body, and it led me to put together the Sunlight RX and teaching people how to use the sun therapeutically. So it was something I was just doing nonchalantly and was like, what?
Why it's so hard for people to take it seriously. Maybe seriously is not the right word, but to really grasp how powerful it is and how integral it is to our whole being.
Yeah.
Is that it's not hard. It's actually really pleasant, unless it's snowing or raining for me. And even the rain, I'm like, it's worth it to go outside. But it's like joyful. It is nourishing at the deepest level because we're programmed to be out connecting with the photons, with all the rays and all the colors and all the sounds of the birds and all the nourishment we get with the frequencies. But so it's still so new as far as that frequency aspect, that until somebody actually does it on a leap of faith, right? Hearing stories like yours, Heather, and says, well, what do I have to lose?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I think you're absolutely right. People hear it and they're like, they don't take it seriously. It's like, it's not this expensive thing. It's not a drug. It's not a fancy thing. It's like, they don't take it seriously. Honestly, we had a farmhand here working with us who has Hashimoto's, and she's like, what should I do for my health? And I tell her about the sunlight. She's like, sunlight. She's like, yeah. I was like,
yeah, but no, yeah, really, Hashimoto's, yeah, get out in the UVA.
I mean, it's like,
yeah.
It's like, well, you asked me, and my wife is like, you should really listen to her. You should really, like, it kind of works, and
I know. Every time I tell people too, they're like, look at me like I'm crazy. Like, but I'm like walking and I'm like, I have a couple of people I speak to in my walks in the morning, and I'm like, you should really take off your sunglasses. And I'll explain to you, I'll try to explain why. And I'll give like a little synopsis, and they're just like, she's still wearing the sunglasses every day. I'm like, all right, I tried. Like, like, just like,
it's really interesting. I think it's not as romantic as other therapies.
Yeah, they want like some big device, like, or like some sort of big like protocol or some big like thing to do. And I'm like, you could just go outside for red light therapy.
Honestly,
that also works too.
Works really well, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think our culture has been so programmed, as you guys know, around the sun is bad and try to avoid it. And so even on some unconscious level, I think people who feel better in the sun and they know that, they're like, yeah, but I shouldn't. It's not, oh, but they said, and it's a lot of rewiring that needs to happen around our thoughts around and beliefs around sunlight.
Well, that's why trusting our bodies is really the foundation of health, in my opinion, right? So being able to build that connection with your body versus always outsourcing it to someone knows better, or I have to have something more complicated or technological or whatever, right? It's like, no, it's really actually quite simple. And that's also true for homeopathy, is learning to trust our body's innate capacity to heal. So I'm so interested of like, I don't remember, you've probably told us, but how did you actually first encounter homeopathy?
Okay, that's a good question. So, so at some point in time, I was trying all the things, right? And finally, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to a homeopath. And honestly, I saw a homeopath shortly after my brain injury. And they gave me a really good remedy, I suspect, for my brain injury, but the potency was too low and too repetitive. And I didn't know anything about homeopathy at the time. And I had a really bad aggravation, and I was like, fuck this medicine. It doesn't work. For the love of God.
That's why it's so important to go see a good homeopath who's trained the right way.
Right. So some of these medicines also, especially homeopathy, I think have great potential, but it's context. You have to use it in the right context. You have to, there's so many nuances to the medicine, right? So
your favorite word.
It's my favorite word, nuances. I hate it so much. But But yeah, and then so it wasn't until years later that I said, well, someone's like, maybe you should try homeopathy. And I did it again, and I was like, they gave me a really high potency. And I took it and I was like, whoa, way such a drastic difference than the first time. And it was the same exact remedy, just in a higher potency.
Yeah.
So,
It's just working on a totally different level of the body then.
totally different level of the body, and homeopathy is another one of those, frequency type medicines similar to sunlight. And yeah, it's a very misunderstood medicine because it was taken out of the medical curriculum after the Flexner report around 1910. And so, it was considered witchcraft since then. And people think it's sugar pellets, and there's so much more to it than that, as you all are well aware of. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was actually reading a book that Heather recommended to me, Heather Crimson, and it's about a little bit about the Flexner report and Rockefeller. And I kind of dug into I kind of skipped around to the homeopathy section because I wanted to know about that part. Because I was like that, because a lot of it's
Yeah.
about capitalism and
Yes.
industrialization. And I got kind of bored, but I'm like, all right, let me go to the homeopathy section and talk about how when homeopathy was removed from schools and whatnot. And the funny thing is that Rockefeller, who was a big part of the movement of removing homeopathy from medical schools, had a homeopath and continued to use homeopathy for himself and his family after the Flexion report came out and after it was removed. I'm like, well, that's really quite interesting now, isn't it? So,
Yep.
That's like the true conspiracy right there. We're going to take all the good stuff ourselves, and you
yeah,
guys can have all the poisons.
Yeah, it
yep,
is. It's so true. It's like Bill Gates and Donald Trump in Key West in Florida. There's 5G is just like swarming over Florida, except for that area where they have houses.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that
isn't that
is
interesting?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy,
So
crazy.
when
Yeah.
did you decide I'm going to be a homeopath? And if you so there's three parts. Like when did you decide, for somebody who has zero exposure or never even heard of homeopathy, how would you define that? And then what type of homeopathy do you practice? Sorry,
Okay.
a three-part question.
I think I can hold that together. Let's see. So after I was given this remedy, and I was like, I had some experience after my acupuncture thing. It was like I waited a little while, and I was like, I got to study this. But it wasn't for a few years that I actually found somebody credible that I wanted to study with. Because today anybody could call themselves a homeopath, especially in the States. I'm not sure about elsewhere. It depends, but without any training, it blows my mind. They literally, you've never taken a course, or maybe you've just taken a weekend course, which you all know it would be a shit show for somebody to call themselves a homeopath after a weekend course. It would be just harmful to their clients, like big time. So when I found somebody I wanted to study with, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. And it was like a 4-year program with clinic and so forth. And I knew there was nothing else, similar to that. And I wanted a lot of experience. So I did that, and started my homeopathy practice. And it's classical homeopathy. I practice classical homeopathy, which basically classical, you can have, there's a lot of different doctors, there's different ways to practice any medicine. So with homeopathy, there's classical homeopathy, there's standard homeopathy. And classical homeopathy is based on, you have one single remedy, and you either, depending on the client, you repeat that remedy, or you give one single dose and that's all they need, and you let that remedy act for several months before you interfere with the process. And I have found that approach to be very helpful with regard to working truly on getting to the root of people's health struggles, versus other homeopaths. They may prescribe this remedy this hour, this remedy this hour in the same day, and it's like so confusing to the immune system. And it's really what's the word, it's really a
It's like an allopathic way to homeopathy, in my
It
opinion.
is.
It's like the same, I view it the same way. Instead
Yeah.
of just focusing on the totality of symptoms and what the person really needs, based on their individual, whatever they're presenting, you're just like, okay, you've got this, you're going to take this, you're going to get this, you're going
Right.
to take this, you got this. And it's like this, like you might as well just take a bunch of supplements or take a bunch of
Yeah.
allopathic medicine. And then they're going to antidote each other anyway. So
They
it's
are.
really not really
Exactly.
going to work out that well. And
It's
I
kind of
think,
like,
like you said,
Vanessa, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I don't want to
yeah.
forget. I liken it to like one song has its own groove, its own rhythm, right?
Mm-hmm.
It all
Mm-hmm.
works together. And that's one remedy. If you have three songs, especially if they're different genres playing at
Yeah.
once, you've got chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like
Agreed.
it all kind of X's itself out. That's what I think of taking more than one remedy as. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I love that. I think that's an amazing way to explain it. I think the same thing too. Like I remember when I never felt worse than when I was taking like 30 supplements. Like it's just so confusing to the body. And I don't know. My husband would tell me all the time, you don't even know which one's working. I'm like, I don't think any of them are really working. And I love when I met with Heather. She's like, I don't think any of these are working for you. I'm like, you're freaking right. And that like really like, it gave me the boost to like get rid of all those things. And honestly, simplifying things have only made things better for me.
Yeah.
So, I do think that we just make our healing really complicated because we don't know what else to do. We're like lost, we're confused. We don't know that the sun really can help. Like we just like looking for all these external things that really just add more chaos to the system.
Yeah.
Yeah,
True.
I definitely felt that on my healing path. So I want to go back to what you said about real root causes of diseases. And I just listening to a podcast this morning, and it's like chronic disease is like up beyond. It's like 60% of Americans have chronic disease. And the question I posed to you, which I know you have a great answer for, is why do we have, does so many people have chronic disease, and why is it on the rise so much?
Oh my gosh. This is like, for some reason, people are like, I don't know why I'm sick. I mean, I don't know why I got this. And it's like, I'm not making fun of everyone, but it's honestly so easy to understand why we're sick. And, so when we look at, people are always like root cause this and that. And it's like, to really understand the root cause, this is how I like to break it down. Typically people have a point in their lives where they feel better or they're healthy. They're healthier, they feel better in their body. And then there's this tipping point, and then suddenly they start to not feel well. And so that stressor that they get, that they're faced with, that initiates that tipping point, is one of the root causes of disease. And usually that stressor is, there's only a few choices of what that can be. It can be a suppressive therapy like a V, an antibiotic, prednisone, something of this nature. It can be an over-the-counter medicine. It can be a big emotional stress, like somebody you really love dies, or there's a divorce, or there's infidelity, or something like this. Or there's a big job change. Literally, those are the main things that activate this shift from, like for me, before car accident tipping point, suddenly not healthy. How do we go back and treat that tipping point, right?
Right.
And then always there has to be a genetic predisposition in place. Usually, unless there's something like an accident, like I can't say brain injuries are really a thing in my family, but that was a unique experience. However, for oftentimes everybody has genetic predispositions, right? They're susceptible. There's a family history of cancer, of alcoholism, of heart disease, of schizophrenia, right? And so that carries on with each generation until we stop it, and we can talk about that. But that is carried over into each generation. And so that predisposition typically needs an activation point in order to actually come to fruition, for that genetic predisposition to go into motion, so to speak. And so those tipping points, those things that I mentioned, the antibiotics or a big stress in life, are typically what triggers the genetic predisposition and is why we're sick. On like you know, a foundational level. Now we can add things in like not enough sunlight exposure, too much exposure to somebody's cell phone or Wi-Fi that just further add fuel to this fire, and all contribute in their own way. But from my experience, when I work with a client and I say, when did this thing start? And they tell me the tipping point, we get to that point in the session, then I can treat them from a root cause place, because I see what has actually activated this organism into an unhealthy state, into a disease state. I don't know if that makes sense.
But you're treating
No.
the current symptom presentation. But I guess what I hear you saying, Heather, is you're also taking into consideration what was the genesis of what started those symptoms to come out, right? Is that what you mean?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. What was that impetus? And then we have to treat that impetus, because everybody, you know, a million people could have Hashimoto's, but what was the trigger for each person?
Right.
Some may have a similar trigger, but a lot of people are going to have a different trigger, and we have to look at that.
Yeah, and I find that it's usually multifactorial too. A lot of chronic disease.
100%.
It's never just one thing. It's never like
Never.
this. Like for me, the vaccination obviously was a major trigger, but I had issues before that. So it's like, you know what I mean? There were other triggers before that underneath that, right? So it's like you really have to pull back all of those layers, you know, to really
Yeah.
get to the each root cause, because there's always many root causes. Like there's
There's
many
many
things.
root causes,
Yeah.
you
Never
know,
just
and say, for example, if after my head injury, I took some sort of Western drug, which they don't really have for a brain injury, but maybe if I was really persistent with the allopathic world, they would tell me I have a seizure disorder or something. You know, they would find something that they would diagnose it as and give me some medication. And that right there would take my pathology and deepen it. So each time we have a suppressor or a major stress, the pathology has this opportunity to deepen into a more chronic state. So maybe a round of antibiotics for an ear infection as a kid isn't going to put you into a diabetic state, but the more stressors that we have over time, then the deeper the chronic disease state gets and the longer it takes to undo all of that stuff that most of us, including myself, have been exposed to, um, especially in the early years of my life, you know?
yeah, me too. And
Suppressives
it's
are like they treat the symptoms only, but they
Yes.
do that by, help me out, Heather, blocking your body's ability to express whatever's the imbalance in your system.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, this is a good one to talk about, because suppressive therapies, let's say you come in with a cough and you take some cough syrup or something and your cough stops. It's like we've been trained to think, okay, you've healed the cough and it's better. And while that may look like the case on paper and from a linear standpoint, something, you suppress the cough. So something, you've suppressed the immune system. The immune system was providing the body with this symptom, and symptoms are our body's way of protecting us from a chronic condition from going deeper in the body. So your body's going to have symptoms. We all have symptoms, and that symptom is trying to protect you in some way. So if we suppress that symptom, we're basically telling the immune system to stop doing its job. And it's like placing a ton of bricks on the immune system whenever we suppress. So it can no longer produce these symptoms. And so over time, we get less acute symptoms because we've suppressed them. And then we get more chronic symptoms as a result of suppressing all of our acute things, because the immune system just doesn't have the power to express an acute symptom. And if somebody can express an acute symptom, like especially a high fever, I'm like, oh, this is awesome.
yeah,
We're on the right track. This is a curable case. Yes.
100%. And it's like I think a fever is a really easy way to understand that, because it's like if your kid has a fever and you stop that fever's action, the fever is the body's way of removing that pathology, right? And if you go give the Tylenol and you stop that fever, yeah, the body just stopped getting rid of that pathology. What you just did, like now it's going to be there somewhere later on in life.
Yeah.
It's the easy way to understand that concept, that suppression is going to cause chronic issues later on in life. And it's like, even I think about myself with like bladder infections and stuff as a kid, like the antibiotics didn't really actually get rid of the infection. Like they're still there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's
Well,
how
and
I
all
think.
these folks who kind of think I don't ever get sick,
Yeah.
that's because they have deeper underlying things. Maybe you have chronic digestive issues or whatever, hormonal imbalance. There's stuff going on, but I think part of the problem here is that we've been led to believe that our level of health is okay when it used to be way more robust, right? When we lived a lifestyle with better quality food and more connected to nature and the rhythms and whatnot, and not as many toxins, right? I mean, we've always had trauma, that's always been there, but we had more cohesive, social systems as well. And so I think people think, well, I don't get sick, but then all of a sudden you're going to have cancer. So not getting sick is sick, whatever that means, like cold or flu or whatever, right? Doesn't necessarily mean you actually have you have good health.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that is highly misunderstood today in our society across the board. Because say somebody comes to me with cancer and they're like, I don't know, I don't understand why I got this diagnosis. I haven't been sick and I can't even remember the last time I was sick. And I was like, that's why. That's why the immune system has been so suppressed that no longer can you get an acute response like a high fever. And so your body goes into a deeper chronic disease state. And high fever is the main number one way the body detoxes and cleanses itself. And when the body can produce that fever on its own, and getting somebody back, I mean, that be an end goal with many of my clients is a main goal I have for them. And sometimes that process doesn't take that long, but when the pathology is deep, it can take some time to undo all of those, suppressive therapies. It's not like an overnight type of thing.
I think that's an important topic to discuss a little bit too, because everybody thinks, okay, I'm going to get my sunlight on, I'm going to get my one remedy, and I'm going to be all fixed. And I'm like, well, it's going to take a little bit longer than that. So it's like, it's years and years that you're trying to undo, and you're not only trying to undo the layers that you've put on yourself, but it's also the generational stuff too. So it is not like this, like, okay, I got my remedy, I go outside, I'm done. Like it's just our chronic issues are so deep rooted, they take a long time to undo.
Yeah, they do. And that's a hard one for people to understand too. I feel like that's a theme in this podcast. Like today, it's like we have to learn how to be a little bit more patient. Of course, we want to see progress. Like you can't just we want to see some progress. But in some cases, the progress isn't going to be like, massive all in once at once. Sometimes it can. Sometimes it can. I'm not saying that's impossible. But your body has layers of pathology, right? And I don't always, want to pathologize things, but I'm talking about from a healing standpoint. If we want to feel better in our body, we have to work through those layers.
Mm-hmm.
And, one layer will come off. Let's say you have chronic constipation, you come and you get a remedy and you do sunlight and the constipation goes away, but then you start to have like reoccurring bronchitis, and you had that as a teenager or a kid. That's a really good sign. It tells us we've removed a top layer. Now we're getting deeper in and the new layers come to the surface. And that's like one of the best signs I see as a homeopath, to be honest. Then we can treat that and then what's underneath that. And we keep working in this way. But this process takes, years. This takes years but there's going to be progress with each, with the months that pass, with the years that pass. You're, oh, I feel better than last year. I don't have this thing anymore. And sometimes clients won't even know that they don't have the symptom anymore. And when you ask them, they're like, oh yeah, I am sleeping better. Oh yeah, I'm going to the bathroom more now than, and so sometimes we need a check-in, a reminder to reflect how the healing is actually going, because people want this like instant message type of response with their healing.
Right.
And
And
the
they want
body just doesn't work that way.
they want everything to be fixed all at
Yeah.
once. It's like, yeah, it's just these, like you said, it's like peeling back those layers,
Yeah.
each one, and then you get deeper and deeper. But yeah, really good stuff. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
these layers, as far as how the suppressed energy, if you will, or whatever you call that, how it can surface, Heather, is also the unprocessed emotion.
Yes.
So interesting. And so there can be lots of things that happen that people may not realize unless they've really sort of, learned a lot about how homeopathy works,
Hmm.
is things start to come up that were previously pushed down, right? So,
Mhm.
Yes, exactly. And um that's one reason why I really like homeopathic medicine, is its ability to address the emotions, like unresolved grief, excessive grief that somebody really just is grieving for years and years and years, or they can't grieve at all, or they have a pattern of being in attracting in really bad partners in relationship, or they've had a shock to their body and now they're in trauma mode, or and they're stuck on ever since they had a shock or a really big fear, they have panic or whatever the emotional symptom may be. And that also I think is really important, because often in the healing world we focus on the physicality of the symptoms, but and the approach is often very much, oh, take this supplement, eat this thing, and not that those things can't be helpful, but we need other medicines like homeopathy that can actually access these emotions, which can be blocks to healing just as much as if somebody has a mouthful of amalgam fillings, right?
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So that I think is also something I think people are just coming to understand, um, how to work with that, or that it's possible to heal these things or find some sort of relief around these emotional areas also.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And how
Yeah.
is it, you told us in class the other day, but if you could also tell our listeners, like somebody who actually does have a higher level of health and they get cancer, what happens in that scenario?
Okay, that's an interesting question, because we all have a different level of health. Some people have a relatively similar level of health, but the higher the level of health, usually the healthier the individual is, the less susceptible they are to a chronic disease state. Um, and usually people with chronic disease states are in lower levels of health. Cancer is an interesting situation, that even somebody who's in a higher level of health can actually experience this disease. And usually how that happens is a very big stimulus comes over the organism, a really big stressor,
Mm.
like a loss of a parent, a big grief, maybe it would have to be a really strong suppressive therapy, but mostly I've seen emotional triggers here, and takes that organism from a high level of health immediately to a lower level of health, because it was such a strong um such a strong
Like a shock.
impetus, exactly, to the system, and it immediately brings them into this different state. Now people who get cancer and they are in a higher level of health, these are the curable cases. These are the quickly curable cases. Not that a lower level can't experience a cancer cure, but somebody in a higher level, which we you all learn in the course, is like, when's the last time they had a high fever, when's the last time they had acutes, what's their energy levels like, right? You can assess you can find out what level of health they're at when you're during the intake process. And so if you're like, hey, this person's in a high level of health, they had this big shock, and now they have cancer, It's like that we know is they have a real chance of overcoming this disease. And people today who are like, I went vegan and I'm cured of cancer. It's like you didn't have that was not a deep, low level of health cancer. That was a high level of health cancer, you
Yeah.
know. Um,
Mhm.
which is why it's
Definitely.
really deceiving when people are like, do this diet because it healed my cancer. Oh my gosh, like,
That's
please
dangerous to
stop.
say that.
It
Yeah.
is so dangerous. It's
It
really
is.
dangerous. And then people do it and they're like, hey, wait, I just like my cancer metastasized even though I did keto, because we're not looking at the whole picture.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And every case is individualized.
So individualized. That's what we need to understand. You can't just use Google as your medical professional.
No.
Well, and this is why, as you were
Yeah.
saying earlier, both of you, about the Flexner report and what happened with how our healthcare, not the some stuff like the bloodletting and the leeches or whatever all that weird stuff is. And, there was like stuff that was not helpful, but
Yeah.
the homeopathy was very, very helpful and powerful, and standard treatment. That was the standard of care. Medical doctors in this country were all trained in that. That was right. The treatment, how do we call it? That was a treatment of choice because it was
Yes.
effective, but it's very tailored. So I think back in the day of like doctors doing home visits and you have a connection and you have a relationship and they see the context and they know your history.
Yeah.
That's really healthcare. And then they tailor the remedy to your unique symptoms and whatever the historical antecedent of those symptoms is, right? Instead of now, it's like, oh, you have high cholesterol, so we're going to put you on statins. And that's true for everyone, which is just basically killing people, and they think it's great. It's like,
Yeah.
what am I missing here? It's really bad.
Yeah, it's just the
Honestly.
ICD-10 code. They just go, whatever the disease is, this is the medication you take. There is no thought. Like, I hate to say it that way, but I really do feel that way. There's not a lot of thought. Like, it's just like, okay, here's the medication for this disease that you currently have. It's like, that's not really that hard. Homeopathy is actually harder. You have to do a lot more digging and a lot more work and a lot, like, it takes a lot more time. And I think that's a big part of the reason why it's not practiced as much today.
Oh,
Well, at least
yeah.
if removed from the medical schools, was because it was harder. It was, it's easier to just give high blood pressure medication, right? It's just
Right.
easier. So, like, yeah.
It's
And
way easier.
it's also like you have to like stay in touch. Like when I've helped people with like acutes and whatnot, I got you have to like be with them through the process to
Right.
heal that, help them heal that acute condition. It's not like you just take the antibiotics, see you later, call me in 7 to 10 days if that doesn't get better. No, you're in communication with them through the process to know that the remedy act is this right? Do I need to adjust? Do I need to change the remedy? Like it's a lot harder.
It's a
So
lot harder.
yeah.
Yeah, and they're like, "How do we make this more efficient? 2,000 remedies or 20 medications to choose from?" Oh, 20 medications to choose from, forget 2,000 remedies, that's too confusing, it's gonna take too long. It's too we gotta get clients in, 7 minutes in, and get them out, and, give them their medication, and let's get the next one in. And that's since the Flexner report, that's the direction it's been moving in, and that the period of time that physicians actually spend with their clients have shortened and shortened and shortened and shortened over over the years. So it's a huge thing. And there was some other point you made that oh, and here's the thing, and everybody's used to this. You go to the doctor and they give you a disease diagnosis, and you focus on that disease diagnosis. I have cancer, this is what I do. I have heart disease, this is what I do. I have eczema, this is what I do. And it's like, maybe some of those recommendations will hit home and be somewhat accurate, maybe. But why did you get cancer? Why do you have heart disease? What are your actual symptoms? Because millions of people have heart disease, and some have heart palpitations. Some person's valve doesn't work. The other person has high blood pressure with it. The other person is thin. The other person's obese. The fuck? You have different treatments for this. You have to learn the symptoms. You can't just say take a high blood pressure or a statin. It's such a disservice
Well,
to
that's the
people.
mechanistic view, right? The body is just a machine, and we're
Yeah,
gonna just change your oil, and everyone should be good with that.
yeah,
And besides, taking those medications is what's causing chronic diseases later on in life. So like It's like, it's such a bad cycle. It's like those medications
Yeah,
are
well, it's really good for profit,
now
Vanessa. Really
problem.
good for profit. We can't have everyone
Yeah.
healed and healthy, and then there's no pharmaceutical industry, and then God forbid, what are we going to do then?
Yeah. Well, the homeopathy is a really cheap way too. Yeah. The
Oh my gosh,
medication.
you buy a remedy for $20 and now the FDA is like, nope, you can't buy homeopathy. They're trying to shut it down. They always try to shut it down.
Is that like happen every so often, or how
Oh
long?
yeah, they always try to do it. I can't tell you, almost every year I've been a homeopath, I've seen it.
Oh, okay. So I shouldn't worry about it.
I mean, who
I'm
knows?
shocked
One day they might like actually do it. So I'm like, I'm over here like, oh, buy the remedies, store.
Knock it up.
I'm the same. I'm the
Yeah.
same. I want to have as many as I can. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, want to be prepared,
Right.
because this is the medicine my whole family uses. And we're not choosing Western medication unless it was an absolute necessity and we had no like other choice. So it's like, I want to have that for them for as much as long as I can. I also want to dive in a little bit to the dilution. And I think a lot of people in the allopathic medical world will tell you homeopathy doesn't work because there's nothing there. There's no substance, So I think that's really something we should chat a little bit about too, because that's what makes it quantum energetic medicine. But we understand that. But people who like if I spoke to like my cousin who's an allopathic doctor and I said to him, yeah, this remedy has nothing in it except for the energetic substance, he's gonna be like, well, you're crazy. So,
I think it's a good topic, and it's a tough one for people to get on board with because we're so used to the physical 3D world and wanting to see things, but you can see the remedy. And people are like, I had somebody ask me the other day, what about the sugar in these pellets? Like, I was like, you eat more sugar in one meal than a homeopathic
Or pellets.
or
yeah,
pellets.
I think you'll be all right.
It's like, please don't let that stop you. Homeopathy is interesting because basically it takes a substance that could be toxic. Let's take, if you OD on sulfur, if you OD on arsenicum, you're going to have diarrhea, you're going to have burning pains, you're going to have extreme fatigue and collapse state, and you're going to be super chilly and shivering and cold. If you take it in an excessive dose. So what homeopathy does is it takes something like arsenicum, it dilutes it in alcohol, water, a carrier substance, and then you do something called succussing. And there's actually a lot of science behind succussing and how many times you have to succuss a remedy. And succussing literally means shaking it vigorously. And there are machines for this because you can't just shake it like 5 times and then here's your homeopathic remedy. Literally in the potencies that I recommend and we use, you'd have to succuss the remedy 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd times in order to get a potentized remedy that will act in the organism. So what people don't understand is that when you produce a substance in this way by first diluting, taking part of the diluted substance and succussing it a certain number of times, a great number of times, you now have this remedy that produces those symptoms when taken in toxic dose, actually cures those symptoms when taken in this minute quantum dose. Because once you get to the 12th C, you no longer have any of the original substance remaining. So say you have arsenicum homeopathic 12C or higher, there's actually no arsenicum in those pellets, but what you have are the energetics of that substance in the remedy. And this is why people are like, oh, horseshit.
Yep.
You want me to take 4 pellets and call you in 6 months? Wait a minute, it's like, this is totally out of our modern realm of thinking, right? Or understanding. So homeopathy, what it does is it takes a substance and a plant, a mineral, part of some tissue, dilutes it in a solution, succusses it. This is what makes homeopathy homeopathy. And people are like, I'm making my own home homeopathy remedies. Listen, I'm all about self-sustaining and, preparing for the end of the world if you think it's going down. However, you're going to have, making a potentized remedy is actually really hard. It's incredibly challenging. Your arm is going to fall off by the time you get to 200 succusses. And, so I highly encourage people to buy potentized remedies from a reputable pharmacy because of this reason. We want to make sure they act. But that's basically what homeopathy does. So the symptoms that produces in a toxic amount, somebody takes arsenicum album, well, you make a homeopathic remedy out of arsenicum, somebody comes into your practice and they're like, oh my God, I'm anxious, I'm restless, I have burning pains, I have diarrhea that burns, I'm completely exhausted. And you're like, arsenicum album. It treats what it causes in toxic dose. So that concept is witchcraft to a lot of people. But when you have somebody come in who's bleeding out of their rectum, has been given a colitis diagnosis, and you give them 2 doses of one remedy, and they stop bleeding and no longer need their medication, you tell me if it works or not.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I know. The dilution part is hard. And people do want to make their own remedies all the time. I'm seeing that more and more. And I'm like, man, that's a lot of work. I don't know if I'd be willing to do that. But, the more dilute the remedy is, the stronger the dose is, which is such like mind
That's
blowing.
uneven.
Even for us who who understand it. But it's like the more quantum it is, the more energetic it is, that like the stronger it is. That's such a cool part of homeopathy. And
Honestly,
yeah,
the higher the potency, and don't just listen to this podcast and be like, I'm going to go get a high potency of blah, blah, blah for my thing.
no.
Please don't do that. This is like, but in certain cases, high potencies are recommended, which is also more of a classical approach of way of practicing homeopathy. And so when you give a higher potency, it acts in a different way. You can address more of the mental emotional issues. You can address really incredibly excruciating, painful situations. Burning cystitis, that's a 20 out of 10 pain with blood, stuff like this. But it's context. You have to prescribe based on the person's symptoms and so forth. But just like you mentioned, the higher the potency, well, actually, the usually the deeper the pathologies it can treat, it can have more of a profound effect on the immune system. But again, we have to understand when to prescribe in high potency and when to not, and don't just Google it or listen to this podcast and be like, I'm just giving 1 Ms to anybody I see on the street. God in heaven, please don't do that.
That's something that we definitely don't recommend. And
Cool.
that's why you call one of us if you want to do
Yeah.
homeopathy.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have a practitioner to help guide you through the process, because it's not as simple as just take this remedy. Because it's really an art between the potency, the frequency, the dosing, all the things. Like, so you really need someone who is trained well, not on a weekend course, like you said before, and knows what they're doing to help guide you through that process of, taking remedies. So yeah, we don't recommend that. And then they'll say it doesn't work because, they just read the bottle or read the, the boron bottle at Whole Foods and said headache, and they took it and didn't get rid of their headache. I'm like, well, that probably wasn't a match for you, so.
Yeah, we really have to move away from compartmentalizing our approach to healing. And even they do it with homeopathy, which I always say, you have to play to something's strengths. You have to, like me, I'm not a plumber. If I'm going to try to fix our plumbing, it's going to be a shit show. It's literally, if I'm a homeopath, right? If you're not a homeopath, don't think you can just go into Whole Foods and get a sinus relief remedy and that it's going to actually work long term. And that's another way how you can determine if something's working for you. If you take it and then you get to a point where you don't need it anymore, or you stop taking it, and your symptoms shouldn't be there if it's getting to the root of the issue. But if you stop taking something and then your symptoms come back, we got some real issues with the substance just palliating your symptoms, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
So
Before we end, you guys, I don't want to forget before we end, is that how this actually works is it helps to sort of wake up or reinvigorate your body's own immune function, Heather.
okay, yes. So how homeopathy works, its mechanism of action is it starts removing the suppressive therapies or the emotional stressors or both from the immune system so it can actually breathe better, so to speak, so it can actually elicit some sort of response. And this is why after you take a remedy, your symptoms are likely to change because your immune system's now working. It's producing new symptoms. Maybe those are old symptoms you had years ago, but what it does is it goes into the organism and it not only starts to remove these suppressive therapies or stressors from the immune system, but it also starts to gradually tweak and change the genetic predisposition. So now it's unlikely. I'm always honest with people, this isn't going to be a panacea and you're better in a week, for a chronic thing that has a strong genetic predisposition. Sometimes, if, like, let's say you and your kids, you give them homeopathy, it could take, 1, 2, 3 generations to fully remove a genetic predisposition. And that is, if we have people committing to this medicine, using less suppressives and so forth, that's a whole shift in the family, shift in the, it's a
In the
big
world.
in the world for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because if we can get people to use that instead, the generations will be more healed, so on and so on and so on and so on, and
Right.
then yeah, it'd be a whole different ball game. But yeah,
It
that's
will.
it.
And then what we'll see in that case is the reemergence of childhood diseases. And and then if we're able to
Right.
treat those with homeopathy, which do really well for childhood diseases, sorry, it just messed up your YouTube rating. Um
It's all good. That we like that.
No, we don't really care about that. We want to get the information out there. It's more important.
Yes, when we can get back to this thing that we didn't have the knowledge or access to before with homeopathic remedies in many places. France and Europe were unique, they had more access to it, but for the most part, it wasn't widely known, accepted. And so, but if we can get back to this place of childhood illnesses, we have a real shot of um, creating a healthier society and having less chronic disease.
Yeah.
If we have that, we have a nicer, more kind world. So what I want, where people are healthy and happier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really suspect that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Agreed. Agreed. Heather, any other questions for Heather? You think of anything else? I think I asked most of my questions. We talked a lot about a lot of really important topics here about homeopathy, and we didn't do a lot of circadian biology, but Heather is also an expert in that as well. But yeah, so
Circadian biology, you do a lot of ancestral nutrition. People who are listeners who want to learn more about how to practice these things, you train homeopaths. I don't know when your next cohort is, but you have a 2-year or so training, comprehensive training, and you have ancestral nutrition training and certification, and there's more you have. Tell everyone what your offerings are.
Yeah. So, yes, I train people how to be classically trained homeopaths. And the next enrollment should be this January.
Great. Okay.
Yeah. And my ancestral health course, which teaches people how to use sunlight and diet primarily to create individualized healing plans for their clients. I have a certification for that, and that is going to be open again soon for just a couple days before the holiday, and then you can keep your eye out for when that comes again in the future. If you're like, you just want to get to know my work, you can get a copy of the Sunlight RX ebook, which is on my site and teaches you how to use sunlight therapeutically. I think those would be really great starting points for sure.
Your website is?
HeatharShepard.com, and it's HeatharShepard. Just to add more confusion, my dad is like, "You're an AR." I was like, okay. Screwed me up.
It makes you unique, Heather. Just
Thank
think of it that way. It makes you unique. I love it. I love it.
Maybe
Nobody else
that's
is gonna
how it was
have that.
originally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that's how it was originally spelled. You never know.
Never
Yeah.
know. I'm
Yeah.
open to it.
Well,
Thanks for
Heather,
having me, you guys.
yeah, we
Oh,
greatly
thank you so
appreciate you
much.
coming on. We love the conversation. It was a really great conversation. You shared a lot of wisdom for our listeners, and I feel like I always learn something new when I listen to you, so I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you guys are awesome. I'm so glad that you're doing this podcast for your community. It's really, really needed. So thanks for having me and putting it out there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you for your big heart and your wisdom and keeping it real, man.
Yeah.
I can't help it. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
that's
bet.
We love that. We love that. Yeah.
You bet.
Okay, thanks,
Awesome.
Heather.